Negative Attempts to Free the Individuality from the Collective Psyche by Carl Jung, read by Gregg Boethin. And this is a follow-up to another one of Jung's essays titled The Persona as a Segment of the Collective Psyche, and I do suggest you listen to that one or read that one before you read or listen to this one. With that said, here's the essay. A. Regressive Restoration of the Persona. A collapse of the conscious attitude is no small matter. It always feels like the end of the world, as though everything had tumbled back into original chaos. One feels delivered up, disoriented, like a rudderless ship that has abandoned to the moods of the elements. So at least it seems. In reality, however, one has fallen back upon the collective unconscious, which now takes over the leadership. We could multiply examples of cases where, at the critical moment, a saving thought, a vision, an inner voice, came with an irresistible power of conviction and gave life a new direction. Probably we could mention just as many cases where the collapse meant a catastrophe that destroyed life, for at such moments morbid ideas are also liable to take root, or ideals wither away, which is no less disastrous. In the one case, some psychic oddity develops, or a psychosis. In the other, a state of disorientation and demoralization. But once the unconscious contents break through into consciousness, filling it with their uncanny power of conviction, the question arises of how the individual will react. Will he be overpowered by these contents? Will he credulously accept them? Or will he reject them? I am disregarding the ideal reaction, namely critical understanding. The first case signifies paranoia or schizophrenia. The second may either become an eccentric with a taste for prophecy, or he may revert to an infantile attitude and be cut off from human society. The third signifies the regressive restoration of the persona. This formulation sounds very technical, and the reader may justifiably suppose that it has something to do with a complicated psychic reaction such as can be observed in the course of analytical treatment. It would, however, be a mistake to think that cases of this kind make their appearance only in analytical treatment. The process can be observed just as well, and often better, in other situations of life, namely in all those careers where there has been some violent and destructive intervention of fate. Everyone, presumably, has suffered adverse turns of fortune, but mostly they are wounds that heal and leave no crippling mark. But here we are concerned with experiences that are destructive, that can smash a man completely or at least cripple him for good. Let us take as an example a businessman who takes too great a risk and consequently becomes bankrupt. If he does not allow himself to be discouraged by this depressing experience, but, undismayed, keeps his former daring, perhaps with a little salutary caution added, his wound will be healed without permanent injury. But if, on the other hand, he goes to pieces, abjures all further risks, and laboriously tries to patch up his social reputation with the confines of a much more limited personality, doing inferior work with the mentality of a scared child, in a post far below him, then, technically speaking, he will have restored his persona in a regressive way. He will, as a result of his fright, have slipped back into an earlier phase of his personality. He will have demeaned himself, pretending that he is as he was before the crucial experience, though utterly unable to even to think of repeating such a risk. Formerly, perhaps he wanted more than he could accomplish. Now he does not even dare to attempt what he has it in him to do. Such experiences occur in every walk of life, and in every possible form, hence in psychological treatment also. Here again it is a question of widening the personality, of taking a risk on one's circumstances or on one's nature. What the critical experience is in actual treatment can be seen from the case of our philosophy student. It is the transference. As I have already indicated, it is possible for the patient to slip over the reef of the transference unconsciously, in which case it does not become an experience and nothing fundamental happens. The doctor, for the sake of mere convenience, might well wish for such patients. But if they are intelligent, the patients soon discover the existence of this problem for themselves. If then the doctor, as in the above case, is exalted into the father-lover and consequently has a flood of demands let loose against him, he must perforce think out ways and means of parrying the onslaught without himself getting drawn into the maelstrom and without injury to the patient. A violent rupture of the transference may bring on a complete relapse, or worse, so the problem must be handled with great tact and foresight. Another possibility is the pious hope that in time the nonsense will stop of its own accord. Certainly everything stops in time, but it may be an unconscionably long time, and the difficulties may be so unbearable for both sides that one might as well give up the idea of time as a healing factor at once. A far better instrument for combating the transference would seem to be offered by the Freudian theory of neurosis. The dependence of the patient is explained as an infantile sexual demand that takes the place of a rational application of sexuality. Similar advantages are offered by the Adlerian theory, which explains the transference as an infantile power aim and as a security measure. Both theories fit the neurotic mentality so neatly that every case of neurosis can be explained by both theories at once. This highly remarkable fact, which any unprejudiced observer is bound to corroborate, can only rest on the circumstance that Freud's infantile eroticism and Adler's power drive are one and the same thing, regardless of the clash of opinions between the two schools. It is simply a fragment of uncontrolled, and at first uncontrollable, primordial instinct that comes to light in the phenomenon of transference. The archaic fantasy forms that gradually reach the surface of consciousness are only a further proof of this. We can try both theories to make the patient see how infantile, impossible, and absurd his demands are, and perhaps in the end he will actually come to his senses again. My patient, however, was not the only one who did not do this. True enough, the doctor can always save his face with these theories and extricate himself from a painful situation more or less humanely. There are indeed patients with whom it is, or seems to be, unrewarding to go to greater lengths, but there are also cases where these procedures cause senseless psychic injury. In the case of my student, I dimly felt something of the sort, and I therefore abandoned my rationalistic attempts in order, with ill-concealed mistrust, to give nature a chance to correct what seemed to me to be her own foolishness. As already mentioned, this taught me something extraordinarily important, namely the existence of an unconscious self-regulation. Not only can the unconscious wish, it can also cancel its own wishes. This realization, of such immense importance for the integrity of the personality, must remain sealed to anyone who cannot get over the idea that it is simply a question of infantilism. He will turn round on the threshold of this realization and tell himself, it was all nonsense, of course. I am a crazy visionary. The best thing to do would be to bury the unconscious or throw it overboard with all its works. The meaning and purpose he so eagerly desired he will see only as infantile maunderings. He will understand that his longing was absurd. He learns to be tolerant with himself, resigned. What can he do? Rather than face the conflict, he will turn back and, as best he can, regressively restore his shattered persona, discounting all those hopes and expectations that had blossomed under the transference. He will become smaller, more limited, more rationalistic than he was before. One could not say that this result would be an unqualified misfortune in all cases, for there are all too many who, on account of their notorious ineptitude, thrive better in a rationalistic system than in freedom. Freedom is one of the more difficult things. Those who can stomach this way out can say with Faust, "This earthly circle I know well enough. Towards the beyond the view has been cut off. Fool, who directs that his way is dazzled eye, contrives himself a double in the sky. Let him look round him here, not stray beyond. To a sound man this world must needs respond. To roam into eternity is vain. What he perceives, he can attain. Thus let him walk along his earth-long day. Though phantoms haunt him, let him go his way." Such a solution would be perfect if a man were really able to shake off the unconscious, drain it of its energy, and render it inactive. But experience shows that the unconscious can be deprived of its energy only in part. It remains continually active, for it not only contains but is itself the source of the libido from which the psychic elements flow. It is therefore a delusion to think that by some kind of magical theory or method the unconscious can be finally emptied of libido and thus, as it were, eliminated. One may for a while play with this delusion, but the day comes when one is forced to say with Faust, "But now such spectredom so throngs the air, that none knows how to dodge it, none knows where. The one day greet us with a rational gleam, the night entangles us in webs of dream. We come back happy from the fields of spring, and a bird croaks. Croaks what? Some evil thing. Enmeshed in superstition night and morn, it forms and shows itself and comes to warn. And we, so scared, stand without friend or kin, and the door creaks, and nobody comes in." Nobody, of his own free will, can strip the unconscious of its effective power. At best, one can merely deceive oneself on this point. For, as Goethe says, "Unheard by the outward ear, in the heart I whisper fear. Changing shape from hour to hour, I employ my savage power." Only one thing is effective against the unconscious, and that is hard outer necessity. Those with rather more knowledge of the unconscious will see behind the outer necessity the same face which once gazed at them from within. An inner necessity can change into an outer one, and so long as the outer necessity is real, and not just faked, Psychic problems remain more or less ineffective. This is why Mephisto offers Faust, who is sick of the madness of magic, the following advice. Right, there is one way that needs no money, no physician, and no witch. Pack up your things and get back to the land, and there begin to dig and ditch. Keep to the narrow round, confine your mind, and live on fodder of the simplest kind. A beast among the beasts, and don't forget to use your own dung on the crops you set. It is a well-known fact that the simple life cannot be faked, and therefore the unproblematical existence of a poor man, who really is delivered over to fate, cannot be bought by such cheap imitations. Only the man who lives such a life not as a mere possibility, but is actually driven to it by the necessity of his own nature, will blindly pass over the problem of his soul, since he lacks the capacity to grasp it. But once he has seen the Faustian problem, the escape into the simple life is closed forever. There is, of course, nothing to stop him from taking a two-room cottage in the country, or from pottering about in a garden and eating raw turnips. But his soul laughs at the deception. Only what is really oneself has the power to heal. The regressive restoration of the persona is a possible course only for the man who owes the critical failure of his life to his own inflatedness. With diminished personality, he turns back to the measure he can fill. But in every case, resignation and self-belittlement earn evasion, which in the long run can be kept only at the cost of neurotic sickliness. From the conscious point of view of the person concerned, his condition does not look like an evasion at all, but seems to be due to the impossibility of coping with the problem. Usually he is a lonely figure, with little or nothing to help him in our present-day culture. Even psychology has only purely reductive interpretations to offer, since it inevitably underlines the archaic and infantile character of these transitional states and makes them unacceptable to him. The fact that a medical theory may also serve the purpose of enabling the doctor to pull his own head more or less elegantly out of the noose does not occur to him. That is precisely why these reductive theories fit the essence of neurosis so beautifully, because they are of such great service to the doctor. B. Identification with the collective psyche. The second way leads to identification with the collective psyche. This would amount to an acceptance of inflation, but now exalted into a system. That is to say, one would be the fortunate possessor of the great truth which was only waiting to be discovered, of the eschatological knowledge which spells the healing of the nations. This attitude is not necessarily megalomania in direct form, but in the milder and more familiar form of prophetic inspiration and desire for martyrdom. For weak-minded persons, who as often as not possess more than their fair share of ambition, vanity, and misplaced naivety, the danger of yielding to this temptation is very great. Access to the collective psyche means a renewal of life for the individual, no matter whether this renewal is felt as pleasant or unpleasant. Everybody would like to hold fast to this renewal. One man because it enhances his life feeling, another because it promises a rich harvest of knowledge, a third because he has discovered the key that will transform his whole life. Therefore, all those who do not wish to deprive themselves of the great treasures that lie buried in the collective psyche will strive by every means possible to maintain their newly won connection with the primal source of life. Identification would seem to be the shortest road to this, for the dissolution of the persona in the collective psyche positively invites one to wed oneself with the abyss and blot out all memory in its embrace. This piece of mysticism is innate in all better men as the longing for the mother, the nostalgia for the source from which we came. As I have shown in my book on libido, Symbols of Transformation, Collected Works, Volume 5, there lie at the root of the regressive longing, which Freud conceives as infantile fixation, or the incest wish, a specific value and a specific need which are made explicit in myths. It is precisely the strongest and best among men, the heroes, who give way to their regressive longing and purposely expose themselves to the danger of being devoured by the monster of the maternal abyss. But if a man is a hero, he is a hero because, in the final reckoning, he did not let the monster devour him, but subdued it, not once but many times. Victory over the collective psyche alone yields the true value, the capture of the horde, the invincible weapon, the magic talisman, or whatever it may be that myth deems most desirable. Anyone who identifies with the collective psyche, or, in mythological terms, lets himself be devoured by the monster, and vanishes in it, attains the treasure that the dragon guards, but he does so in spite of himself and to his own greatest harm. Probably no one who is conscious of the absurdity of this identification would have the courage to make a principle of it. But the danger is that very many people lack the necessary humor, or else it fails them at this particular juncture. They are seized by a sort of pathos, Everything seems pregnant with meaning, and all effective self-criticism is checked. I would not deny in general the existence of genuine prophets, but in the name of caution I would begin by doubting each individual case, for it is far too serious a matter for us lightly to accept a man as a genuine prophet. Every respectable prophet strives manfully against the unconscious pretensions of his role. When therefore a prophet appears at a moment's notice, we would be better advised to contemplate a possible psychic disequilibrium. But besides the possibility of becoming a prophet, there is another alluring joy, subtler and apparently more legitimate, the joy of becoming a prophet's disciple. This, for the vast majority of people, is an altogether ideal technique. Its advantages are the odium dignitatis, the superhuman responsibility of the prophet, turns into the so much sweeter odium indignitatis. The disciple is unworthy. Modestly he sits at the master's feet and guards against having ideas of his own. Mental laziness becomes a virtue. One can at least bask in the sun of a semi-divine being. He can enjoy the archaism and infantilism of his unconscious fantasies without loss to himself, for all responsibility is laid at the master's door. Through his deification of the master, the disciple, apparently without noticing it, waxes in stature. Moreover, does he not possess the great truth? Not his own discovery, of course, but received straight from the master's hands? Naturally, the disciples always stick together, not out of love, but for the very understandable purpose of effortlessly confirming their own convictions by engendering an air of collective agreement. Now, this is an identification with the collective psyche that seems altogether more commendable. Somebody else has the honor of being a prophet, but also the dangerous responsibility. For one's own part, one is a mere disciple, but nonetheless a joint guardian of the great treasure which the master has found. One feels the full dignity and burden of such a position, deeming it a solemn duty and a moral necessity to revile others not of a like mind, to enroll proselytes and to hold up a light to the Gentiles, exactly as though one were the prophet oneself. And these people, who creep about behind an apparently modest persona, are the very ones who, when inflated by identification with the collective psyche, suddenly burst upon the world scene. For, just as the prophet is a primordial image from the collective psyche, so also is the disciple of the prophet. In both cases, inflation is brought about by the collective unconscious, and the independence of the individuality suffers injury. But since by no means all individualities have the strength to be independent, the disciple fantasy is perhaps the best they can accomplish. The gratifications of the accompanying inflation at least do something to make up for the loss of spiritual freedom. Nor should we underestimate the fact that the life of a real or imagined prophet is full of sorrows, disappointments, and privations, so that those Hosanna-shouting band of disciples has the value of a compensation. All this is so humanly understandable that it would be a matter of astonishment if it led to any further destination whatever. And that ends Negative Attempts to Free the Individuality from the Collective Psyche by Carl Gustav Jung. And as a note, there's an essay following this one titled The Function of the Unconscious, and I suggest you check that one out as well. I'll be recording that one here shortly. Thank you for listening.